Now, because I'm going to have a feature at the bottom of this one, we're going to make sure that we have a loop on the top and the bottom of our feature bead. In order to have that, we actually use a bit of wire. So this is a 0.8 millimeter silver plated wire. I'm going to use my cutters to cut a length of that. It doesn't need to be too long. It could be around about 4 to 5 centimeters, depending on the size of the bead. I have quite a large bead here, so I'm going to be a bit more generous. I'm cutting with the middle of my cutter, okay, because that's the most effective place, as I mentioned previously. And I'm holding the excess in my hand because I don't want it to shoot off the table. There we go. Now, we need to create a loop. So to create a loop on the top and the bottom, I need to do my first loop on the pin and then insert it onto the bead. I'm using my round nose pliers. And I'm going to position the wire in between the pliers a few millimeters from the tip, because I don't want my loops to be really small, but I don't want them to be too big either. So it's closer to the tip. Now there's a couple of different ways of making these loops, and I'm going to show you two, and you can practice both and see which one works best for you. The first one is a case of rolling your wrist. So I've got my hand facing down with my wire in between the pliers. There's no wire sticking out the top and all the wires at the bottom. I'm going to roll my wrist forward as far as I can take it, and I always hold as close to where I'm bending as possible. If I hold further down, I bend the whole wire out of shape, and that's something I want to avoid. So I'm holding right up at the top, and I roll my wrists forward as far as I can take them. If I can't take it too far, I want those two wires to touch. If they're not touching, you can actually go in again, position the tip of the pliers inside the loop, and push that loop closed. Right, so now I've created a little lollipop. It's quite sweet, but its head's tilted off to one side, and ideally what we want is to create more of a question mark shape or a straight loop. So to get that straight loop, we put the round nose pliers inside the loop. I have one of the prongs on the long part of the wire, and the other one is on the other side of that, on the inside of the loop. And I just tweak it very gently so I get that little question mark shape. That's the perfect loop that we want. We then put that through our bead. Okay. And now, luckily, that forms a stopper as well. Now I want to do the same thing on the other side. But I've got a bit of excess wire there, so I need to trim some of that off. So in order to do that, I need approximately 1 centimeter above the bead in order to do that. I use my forefinger and my thumb as a marker. Obviously, we all have different size fingers, so after a bit of practice, you'll know whereabouts you need to make your marker. But I'm holding that position directly above the bead with my forefinger and my thumb, and I'm also using one of my fingers at the bottom to secure the bottom there, just so I have extra strength and the bead doesn't slide out from underneath my hands. I then take my cutters, I place them right up against my fingers, not including the fingers, and I trim off my excess. I'm holding that down towards the table so it doesn't shoot off and hurt somebody in the eyes. Okay, so now I'm going to make a judgment and see if that's enough. It's slightly too long still, so I think I'm going to trim off just a fraction more. Once again, holding it down towards the table. Right, now I can make my loop. So it's the same thing again. Position the wire in between the pliers, nothing sticking out the top, and you can choose how to roll your wrist forward. So we'll do the same thing, the rolling of the wrist forward again. Okay, take it forward as far as you can take it, and if it doesn't quite meet on the other side, you can go in again and close the loop with your pliers. We then want to straighten up that loop and make it more of a question mark. So pliers on the wire that's going through the bead, and then on the other side of that too, and I just tweak it and I've got it straightened up. Okay. Sometimes you might find that your loops are going in all different directions and you want to get them both going in the same direction, or the design might require them to be going in two different directions. So in that case, what you can do is you can hold your loops in between some flat pliers and you can twist them accordingly to straighten them out or to make them go in different directions. Okay, so I'm quite happy with that. Now I want to start looping up my beads. So the loops that I did on that feature bead were by rolling my wrist forward. This is, I'm going to do a slightly different version, but I still need to trim off the excess wire above the bead. So as with before, I need to measure above the bead with my forefinger and my thumb, approximately 1 centimeter, and I use my cutters to trim off the excess. I then position my wire in between my pliers with nothing sticking out the top. Now, instead of rolling my wrist forward, this version is using the wire and bending the wire around the pliers. So I'm going to push the bead away from me and I'm going to bring it all the way around the pliers, and so hopefully it creates a loop. If the bead's quite bulbous, it will get in the way, which is what's happened here, so you can go in again and complete that loop too. If you've got a longer bit of wire, it goes all the way around and it hopefully forms the perfect little loop. But you still have the little tilted loop that goes to the side, and we want to make it the question mark. So you go in again, position the pliers in between the loop and just tweak it up straight. Sometimes when you do that, when you tweak it, the little loop opens up a bit. So if that is the case, you just go in with the tip of your pliers and you push the loop closed, and that's absolutely fine. So I'm going to continue doing that with all of my beads. So I create a little bit of a production line going. And that means that when I come to actually attaching them to my necklace, I am able to string them all in one go. Okay. Always make sure that your loops are properly closed, because if they are not, you might lose a few beads. Something else that you can try to get your little question mark shape is, once you've created your actual loop, you can use the edge of the bead or the hole of the bead as something that you can push the wire up against to give you that little bend or that little tweak in the wire. I'll do that again on the next one. It's a bit sparkly and sometimes it reflects in the light. So, trimming off my excess. Rolling my little loop, and I'm going to use the edge of the bead to bend the wire. You do have to be cautious if they are glass beads and some semi-precious beads, because it can chip the edge of the bead as well. So do that with a little bit of caution. All right, just want to make sure that I'm maintaining my design. There you go. So the last part of this side of the necklace is a little bit different. So we've put a little loop on the top of each of these beads, but for the last section there, we're actually going to do a little cluster of beads. And so again, it's the same. You just make a little loop on the top of each. It's quite fiddly with these ones because they are so small. And so I just trim with my cutter, still approximately 1 centimeter above the bead, holding it down towards the table. Straightening up my loop and making sure that it's closed. Trying to keep the loops all consistently the same size. The way I can do that is by positioning my wire on the same part of the round nose pliers. So once I've cut the excess off, I then position it, that's a little bit long, I'm going to cut a little bit of that excess off. So I decide to position it at that point on the plier, and I stick with that point through all my loops, and that way they're around about the same size. Okay, making sure that it's closed. And what makes this different is that I'm going to join them together with a little jump ring. Okay, so as with before, I hold the split ring with the split up towards the sky, and I'm using my 2 flat pliers, and then I thread each of these beads onto that jump ring. So I've created a little charm cluster, making sure that that's properly closed by wiggling it into position, and then I place that into position. I'm going to repeat that process on the other side by making a loop on each bead and a little cluster on the top there. So now what I'd like to do is I'd like to attach all of those components onto my chain section or the loops of my necklace. For that I'm going to use some larger jump rings. So I'm going to grab a whole bunch of those, and I'll go back for more if I need them. I'm going to count out how many I'm going to need. I'm actually going to use jump rings to attach the spikes onto there as well, because they've got a little loop on the top, much like the ones I've just created on my bead. So all of these are going to be added with some rings. So I'm going to count out. I need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and the same on the other side. So I'm going to create like a little production line. It just makes it easier and faster. And so I'm going to prepare 20 split rings, and I'm going to open them up, as I did before, with the split up towards the sky, and it's a push forward motion. Push forward, pull back to close. And 10. Okie doke. In fact, I'll do one more for my feature bead as well. So we'll start off with that and then work our way up. So, attaching the feature bead onto the ring, I then grab the loop that I'm going to work onto, which is this middle one here, the middle and bottom one, and I just place that ring onto the feature ring, and I close it up as I did before by pulling it back on itself, making sure that they close completely, and wiggle it into place so that it doesn't fall off. That is the basis of my necklace. And then I'm going to start beading up just above that too. Okay, so let's get this production line going. Next ring. We'll get the spike onto that jump ring. And then using my 2 flat pliers, I wiggle that closed perfectly. Next one. Once I get towards the end, I've got my little cluster that I need to attach. And I attach that by just placing the little jump ring that the beads are hanging off onto the larger jump ring. And then I close that up in the same way as I've been doing all the way along. I'm just going to have a quick look at that and see how that's falling. I'm quite happy with that. It's looking quite funky and edgy, and I think with it going up the other side, it's going to look really quite striking too. And now repeat the same process along the other side by attaching a cluster at the top with a little jump ring onto the larger jump ring too. Okay, so we have now completed all the beading attachment to the top of that loop. What I want to do now is I actually want to put my little cluster and spike cluster at the bottom. To do that, I've already pre-prepared some little looped beads, as I've done all the way through, but this we attach by connecting all these beads onto a larger jump ring. So I'm going to start off, they might not all fit onto this jump ring. I'm just going to do a little test and see. It might be overloaded and it might not close very well. So let's get the beads on and see if we need to take a few off or if they'll hang okay. Because of the shape of the beads and because they're all quite rounded in places, they can be a bit bulbous and bump into one another, which can push things into directions that you don't really want things to go. So we'll just see how it works out for us, and then we might need to eliminate. Right, so I've got my little cluster. I'm then going to attach it to the bottom loop on the bottom of the bead. Okay, all right. Hopefully it all stays in position. And again, I've got to wiggle that jump ring into place, making sure that that split is completely closed. Otherwise, that little cluster will just fall apart. So when you saw it all laid out like that, it looked quite full. But as you see, when we'll hold it up, our beading all falls, so it becomes more of a jangly cluster. I'm actually going to leave it like that. I quite like that design, but if you wanted to, you can actually really embellish it and go to town by adding more beads up there or by embellishing these sections here as well. I think that's got a bit of an edge to it. So what we're going to do now is we're going to attach the clasp on the end. Now, there's various types of clasps that you can use. Clasps are traditionally placed on the right-hand side, so that the wearer can use their right hand to undo the clasp. This is because the majority of the populations around the world are right-handed. However, if you're making something for somebody who's left-handed, then you can do that to commission and do it on the left-handed side. The clasp we're going to use today is called a lobster clasp. The reason why it's called a lobster clasp is because it looks like a lobster claw. It's quite sturdy, and we're going to team that with one of the larger jump rings on the other side, and then we're going to attach that lobster clasp with a smaller jump ring. But before I do that, I'm just going to talk about some of the variations of clasps that you could possibly get. Much like the lobster clasp, we've also got a bolt ring. So that's the same principle. It's got a trigger catch, so you pull the little trigger and it opens up there, and that slots onto the ring, as does the lobster. But the bolt ring's round in shape, used most for more discreet or more finer pieces of jewellery. This one here is a bit more fancy. It's got a stone set into it, and you push it down and you pull it out. It's kind of an old-fashioned style trigger clasp that you push back into place, and forms a bit of a feature on the back of the necklace. Another version is a magnetic clasp. So this one, you get variations on magnetic clasp. Sometimes they're just a ball that comes together with two magnets. This one, for extra security, it slots into itself and you can hear the magnetic click. The magnetic one with this extra bit of security is useful for when you're stringing pearls or semi-precious beads, just for that extra bit of hold. And then the last one, although there's various variations of clasps, is your little toggle or your T-bar, and that slots in there and sits like that. Okie doke. So let's attach our lobster clasp. So I'm going to use the small jump ring to attach the actual clasp itself. I'm going to put the clasp on the right hand side, although this necklace is actually reversible, so it doesn't really matter. But if you had something that faced forward only, then you would do it on the right hand side, making sure that that ring is completely closed, and then attaching another ring on the other side. And that's your completed necklace. Now, using the technique that we've just done, using the eye pin and the loops on top, you can create loads of different variations. Those can be strung together. You can connect those little loops onto some chain. You can connect them onto various different types of chain. You can connect them onto one big link and create a big statement necklace. It's an endless amount of possibilities with that technique, and it's something that translates even into fine jewellery as well. So it's one of the basic jewellery making techniques, and it'll take you onto many, many projects.